Hi everybody, welcome to the Adapt podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to learn the valuable stories of small and medium business owners and leaders, some of the challenges that they've faced along their journey, the creative ways they've tackled those, the epic fails they've had and what they've learned from those, all the while keeping people and culture at the core of everything. Now, we want to become the number one podcast for small and medium business owners and leaders around the world. And if you're interested in helping us get there, please like, subscribe, follow, share our episodes with anybody that you think can get value, and give us your feedback, give us reviews, tell us how to get better and how to give you information and knowledge and wisdom that you're really interested in. So in today's episode, I'm very lucky to have Shane Addis, the founder of ERGT Australia. And we spent some time talking about the 3 decades that they've been through of building an enduring SME, how to create the space for good people to flourish, and the fact that excellent strategy does not need to be complex or complicated, but it is absolutely crucial to get right. I hope you guys enjoy and get a lot of value from this one. Okay, well, today it's a very, very big privilege for me to welcome Shane Addis, founder, organisational leader of ERGT Australia. Thank you for joining me on the podcast, Shane.
Great to be here, Gabe. Thanks a lot for having me.
How are you going today?
Yeah, pretty good. I've had 2 coffees already, so I'm probably ready to bounce off the walls a bit, so you might have to just steer me gently in the right direction.
No, we'll just make for a good energy through our chat today. Shane, I want to give you a chance to just tell us a bit about ERGT Australia and what you guys do today.
Cool, thanks, Gabe. So we're a training provider mainly to high-risk industries like the oil and gas or offshore oil and gas industry, defence, aviation, maritime, and increasingly mining. And we provide experiential learning in a workplace context, and we do the sort of training that people can't do on site because sort of setting fire to stuff is a bit of a problem on site. Crashing helicopters in the water is a bit of a problem. So a lot of the training we do requires them to come to our training centres, and we've got centres here in Perth, that's our main one. We've got one in Darwin, one in Melbourne, and we run centres for ExxonMobil in Victoria and a couple for defence on the East Coast. So overall, and we've been doing this for 30 years, we've got about 250 people, 160 odd permanents. And we sort of, over 30 years, we've become part of the system, I guess, that delivers this sort of training to those industries that absolutely require it.
Awesome. A very amazing facility here in Perth. I've had the pleasure of touring the place under your guidance and saw the big building structures you guys set on fire, and saw the helicopters inside buildings that go underwater, and just the amazing spaces and amazing opportunity to expose people to training in those realistic environments where a lot of the risks and stuff are mitigated so that there's room to learn. Yeah. And so also in the spectrum of small medium enterprises, you guys are on the larger side. So you got was that 160?
Yeah, about 160 permanent staff. So 150 FTE.
Yep. And about 230, 240 total.
Yeah,
employees?
roughly. Yeah, because we use quite a few casuals as well. Yeah.
What is it like to run a big business like that?
Easier than running a small business, I've got to tell you. Seriously.
Why do you say that?
Well, it's in order, the fact that we're still alive at this, after 30 years, we've learned a huge amount along the way. And there's we've always had great people in our business. It's never ever been about me. And I never had the capability just to sort of do this with a few helpers. This has always been a team effort right from day one. So, and now we've got sort of a systemised approach to having lots of fantastic people in the business, and generally, heaps of room for improvement. But the way we do things and the way where we sit in the market, the level of competition we have, life is, we're able to focus on the things that are really important rather than being distracted by the things that are just, the little spot fires that most certainly we experienced for the first 20, 25 years of business.
Yeah. And so I believe it's 3 decades this year, right?
That's right. Yeah, just a few weeks ago.
That's an extraordinary achievement.
Yeah, well, we started out expecting to last for maybe 6 months, and then maybe a year, then maybe 2 years, and it was after about 15 years we thought, oh geez, maybe we've got something that might last. So it's been a good journey.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
And the biggest operator of its kind in Australia?
Well, in doing what we do, and it's a very niche thing, we've had quite a few competitors over the years, only one or two sort of really direct competitors. We find ourselves in a situation where we're almost a monopoly in what we do now. And we take that responsibility very seriously. You know, we see that as more of a responsibility than an opportunity. So, you know, there's definitely benefits that come with it, but geez, you can lose trust very, very quickly if people see that you're a monopoly and taking advantage of the situation. So,
absolutely.
But that's part of what makes life easier. We put a lot of effort into managing that level of trust with our clients and with the industries we work in. So, seems to work pretty well.
Well, I mean, just the fact that you're able to do it for so long at such a high level is a big testament to that.
Yeah.
And so now training facilities around the country. So Western Australia, Victoria, Northern Territory, any others? Yeah,
so we run a centre for Army, a helicopter underwater escape, or Hewitt Centre. We run a centre for Army in Townsville. We support the Navy Centre at Nowra in New South Wales. And then we've got a very small team of 3 supporting Navy at HMAS Cerberus in Victoria. And that's a really cool training centre. It's not ours, but we'd love to have it. It's really, really cool. They are rigid hull inflatable boats, so rescue boats that they, you know, like the Navy use for, you know, approaching other vessels for searches, that sort of a thing. And this is the only training centre of its type in the Southern Hemisphere, and it basically flips the rigid hull inflatable rescue boat upside down.
Wow.
So, which is very similar to the way we do helicopter underwater escape training. Anyway, sorry, I get excited about that because it's such a cool setup.
I get excited about this stuff as well, and I can tell you who doesn't get excited is Gillian, one of our coaches, because she's told me, and under certain terms, does she want to go into a helicopter that gets flipped upside down into the water?
Right, we'll have to arrange that.
And I'm sure you see all sorts of different reactions to having to undergo some of the training that people have to do.
Yeah, well, look, you know, we train on average probably about 6,000 to 7,000 people per year. So now that's a bit more now than what it used to be. So I don't know, we've certainly trained a lot of people over the years. And I don't know, somewhere between 5 and 10% of people really find it pretty challenging. You know, most people get a bit nervous about it, but some people find it really difficult. But that's part of our job, is to help make that easy for them. And our trainers are fantastic at it.
It's very high stakes training as well, because the knowledge and the skills people need to take away from your training courses really is designed to hopefully save their lives and other people's lives.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly right. And look, it ranges a lot. You know, we do the helicopter underwater escape training is designed for the individual, the passenger in the aircraft. We also train pilots, but the majority of people we train are passengers. But then we also train emergency response teams. So the teams, we're training them to work as a team at the same time as we're training them with the specific skills that they'll employ as a team. So there's a number of different types of, you know, it's just not just the content of training, it's the way and who it's intended for, you know, individuals versus teams. And in some cases, we're training the offshore installation manager. So that's the person who's in charge of an entire offshore rig or a facility. People commonly sort of know them as rigs, but technically they're facilities. And that person's team of 4 or 5 people who will then manage the overall response to an emergency. So that's a real team effort, really high stakes decision making, and we're pretty much the only training provider in the country that does that too.
So help me understand the scope of your customer base. So you have defence as a sector.
Yeah, defence is a little under 10% of our business. And probably unusual in that we contract with Defence to run those centres. All the rest of the training we do, and even for ExxonMobil, our contract is for the delivery of individual courses or places on courses. So even though we're operating in ExxonMobil's training facilities, they've got one of the largest fire training facilities in the country. So we operate within that, but we run it as if it's our own centre, because over the sort of 12, 13 years we've been contracted to Esso, they've recognised that we do our jobs more effectively if we are running it as our centre. That's what we do. We run training centres.
So big resource component to the customer base.
Particularly offshore oil and gas. And part of what defines our markets, there's a suite of courses that each industry is going to need to do. And ideally they'd prefer to deal with one or only a couple of providers rather than multiple providers. So that's one of our We've worked very hard to build a competitive advantage in offering a full suite of services and being able to work with those very large corporations. And to give you an idea, when we were first contracted to Esso or ExxonMobil back in 2011, they were the largest listed company in the world, and they were for most of the first 4 or 5 years that we operated with them. And at the same time, we're dealing with Joe or Jill Bloggs who've left school last year looking for a job. So our client base ranges from
very broad.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So, so the offshore oil and gas industry, though, they are a cracking example of an industry that cannot do the training in their own facilities. They've got to come to a training centre like ours with specialist facilities and trainers. So, so that helped to define that course, and we call that a primary market. For us, we're clear we have a primary market in offshore oil and gas.
Yeah.
And then because we offer those sorts of services, we then serve other industries like maritime and aviation that have similar needs, but we really just focus on the particular areas where we specialise. So in maritime, there's a whole heap of training for the maritime sector that we don't do, can't do, and
have chosen not to.
And have chosen not to do, yeah. But what we do for the maritime sector is very similar to what we're doing in oil and gas, as an example. So we've got that primary market in offshore oil and gas, and really we say that those secondary markets like mining, maritime, aviation, and we include defence in there. So those secondary sectors help to support our position in the oil and gas sector. Because if we leave a space in that secondary market, if we don't serve the maritime market, it's likely another training provider will be established in that space that will then start looking around at the oil and gas industry because the maritime market's too small to sustain a decent quality provider.
Yep.
So we sort of think about this stuff quite strategically in terms of who we're serving, and it's all very long term. So we've done 30 years in oil and gas, and we'll be there for as long as the oil and gas industry continues to need our services.
Amazing. And so there's a very big forward-thinking culture in the RGT, and so I'm going to flip this right on his head and go back to 1994, a founding moment, thereabouts. I just want you to talk me through how did this all come into life?
It's not quite by accident, but pretty close. So there was a group of us, there were 4 of us in total who had an outdoor adventure training business. So this was back in the early 90s. And we started the business in 90 or 91, I think. And this was back when the Hawke and Keating governments had what they called a training guarantee levy. So employers over a certain size had to spend, I can't remember what, that's a couple of % of their total payroll on training. And somehow we managed to get recognised as a training provider. So we'd get these mobs who'd come out and go whitewater rafting or rock climbing or abseiling or something like that for a day or a couple of days. We'd all go to the pub afterwards. We'd get paid. They'd be happy because they've sort of, the ATO's not taking their money. They're handing it over to somebody else instead. So that worked really nicely for us, and we had a great time. But there was never any risk that we were going to make a sustainable profit. And through that, we did a bit of work with another organisation that did team building, sort of an organisational development training, and it was pretty fun and cool stuff. And I could see the potential of it, but I could see that it also was nowhere near enough to have an impact. It's sort of like the Trust Falls type of thing, all of those team building activities, which is sort of nice, but they don't really do anything much unless they're a part of an overall program. And so I realised we probably needed to do something different. And the guys I was in business with were ex-SAS regiment guys, heaps of those people around in Perth. Certainly were back in the early 90s, and they knew every mine safety officer in WA at the time. So we thought, why don't we do safety training for the mining sector? So we were able to translate our roping skills, abseiling and rock climbing, into height safety and confined space safety and emergency response. That's sort of what got the business started in 94, just to flip from outdoor adventure training into safety training. We had no idea what we were doing. We had no business plan. We just thought, let's give it a stab. And the guy, if there's a true founder of ERGT, it's not me. There's one other guy there who really was the sort of guy who would make that really just wild entrepreneurial spirit. Hell yeah, let's just give this a crack. And the rest of us are going, oh yeah, we've got nothing better to do. Let's tag along. Yeah. So that's how I got started in 94. So I never would have started it by myself. And most of the decisions the bold decisions that he made that sort of got us really going in the first few years, I probably would have said, no, we shouldn't do that. I would have been far too conservative.
Okay.
But I had some ability, at least, not great, but some ability to actually get the organisation to function. And by organisation, I'm talking 4 or 5, 6 people here. Whereas he absolutely did not have that capability.
Yep.
So gradually over time things changed, and so by 2002 he'd left the business, and so the other couple of guys who were there at the start.
Okay.
And it was me and another crew who have stayed with us ever since.
And so you're the final remaining
Correct.
founding member
Yeah.
In ERGT.
Yeah.
And there's a very strong argument when you talk to people thinking about starting a business. One of the big pieces of advice is get a co-founder. And it's the idea of having a buddy or a teammate on the early years where it's extraordinarily difficult, but also the opportunity to have complementary skill sets and opposing perspectives to help make better decisions. And it's very, very common then in those types of businesses to see maybe a visionary or entrepreneurial leader who is the gung-ho, shit, yeah, let's get it done, take the risks and have a crack, and to be complemented by somebody who has got more organizational leadership, natural acumen, actually keeping the wheels on track, organizing the troops, and making sure that when the shit gets done, it can continue to keep getting done at a high standard.
Yeah, that sounds right. Well, I mean, there was no such thing as a startup back in the early 90s. I don't think that phrase was coined until sometime later. Maybe there was in the US, but certainly not Australia.
Yeah.
We just thought we were a small business doomed to fail. But in retrospect, you're exactly right. This guy, Rick was his name. So Rick and I, it was really the two of us were the main players in the business. And that, what you've just described is exactly what ended up happening with us.
And so what on earth drove you to be here 30 years later, still doing it? And so what is the thing that kept you on this journey, building what today is an extraordinary organisation?
Thank you. Look, I guess 2 things in terms of what we do, in the training space. So I studied agricultural science at uni, at UWA, 4-year degree. One of the things 2 things came out of that. One, I noticed that there were lecturers who were fantastic educators. They were just brilliant. Learning with them was great fun, engaging, easy. People all got good results in their exams because they just got into it. And there were other lecturers who were very good researchers. And the learning with them was nigh on impossible. It was just bloody hard work. And you could see the difference. And I'm going, well, hold on. And this is before HEX, fortunately, but I was sort of thinking, geez, if I was paying money for this, I'd be pretty unhappy at the quality of service I'm receiving from those with whom I'm struggling. And then I did a unit there called Agricultural Extension, which is really about taking scientific research to the farming community in a way that is pretty easy to translate into practical improvement. And I really enjoyed that. It was about taking really quite complex stuff, finding the essence of the insight, the thing that was really going to make a difference to farmers and their agricultural production, and then finding a way to communicate that to them effectively. And I loved that. I thought this is really cool stuff. So then when I found myself in the adventure training space, I could see what worked really well in adventure training and what didn't. The experiential learning worked really well, but again, you had some people who were really good facilitators and others who just really weren't cut out for it. And often there was a big difference between the people. So for example, I spent a bit of time with a guy who was probably at the time Australia, one of the 2 or 3 best rock climbers in Australia. Sensational rock climber. He could climb freaking anything. Hopeless trainer, hopeless at educating other people, training other people how to rock climb. He had never had to go through what the rest of us Gumbies had to learn about, well, you put this hand here and this hand here and you sort of keep your weight on your hip, low on your hip. He never had to deal with that. And so I discovered that was one of the first things I learned was, well, being smart and knowing a lot in a space actually is more likely to make you a less effective trainer or facilitator of learning than to help it. So that was the first thing anyway. And as we got into the sort of safety training space, we did a few courses with different organisations, including the WA Fire Brigade, as it was at the time. And that was all a case of people who knew lots of stuff but were terrible educators. And so the quality of learning experience was just awful. People paying a lot of money for courses that they had to attend in order to fulfill their work roles, learning either nothing much or actually learning bad habits from people who just should have never been involved in training and education in the first place. And that partly was the individual trainer or facilitator's fault, but it was more likely the organisation that they were a part of.
Okay.
And as I talked to potential clients around the place, I learned that the general view that Australians had of training in the safety and emergency response space was that it was just rubbish. And as a result, they paid not very much for it, because why would we pay much if it's going to be rubbish? And I sort of thought, geez, this doesn't need to be this way, right? So that sort of started out becoming the real driver for ERGT, even from the very early days, was look, if we're going to do this, let's do it properly. And we don't see anybody else out there really doing a cracking good job in this space. So if we're not going to do it well, no one's going to do it well. So let's just do that. And that still drives us today, perhaps even more now than it ever used to. And 30 years later, I can tell you, and apologies to any other training provider that's listening, but the reality is what we see out there and what we hear from clients and potential clients is that nothing's changed. It's the quality of training to industries around Australia for compliance-driven training in the space of safety. It's purely about get a ticket that you can tick a box to say that you've met this minimum requirement. Not at all is it about learning. So you've got a whole bunch of people running around in industries who think they're safe and who just really aren't.
Yeah.
So we're about doing as far as we're concerned, yes, people will get a certificate or a statement of attainment once they've done training with ERGT, but our main motivation is that they leave our premises ready to go straight back to work and be safer straight away. Like translate the skills they've learned straight back into the workplace.
So the bigger outcome from spending time with the ERGT is the fact that they step back into the workplace at an elevated level in terms of skills and knowledge.
Correct.
Instead, rather than a piece of paper.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And the piece of paper is necessary because there's a legal compliance requirement. There's no denying that. And without that, we wouldn't get the opportunity to train those people to give them the skills they need to actually be safe or to ensure the safety of their colleagues.
But that piece of paper is not going to save their life or somebody else's.
Not at all, no. Yeah. And a lot of the time, as I say, I think it leads to a false sense of confidence or security that your people are safe when in fact they're not.
I think one of the reasons why I'm so excited about you guys as a company, I've been through years of emergency and safety training and some of the crazy stuff I've done in my life. And I've been exposed to the mediocre quality of training and also some really good quality of training. But I know firsthand that it can be really difficult to get really quality training where you walk away from that and you step back into your job and you feel better equipped.
Yeah.
And I know also from knowing your team so well for a number of years now is that absolute attitude towards let's have a crack and let's do a bloody good job.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Gabe. Look, can I just add to that quickly?
Please.
So part of I think what's then, as we've been more committed to doing this well, what we've learned is, and I shouldn't say there are certainly some very good training providers around the place, but they tend to be 1 or 2 or 3 person operations where the owners of the business are also the practitioners and they are fabulous at it, right? And this is a common SME sort of issue across all fields, right? They are really good trainers, but they can't build it at scale. As soon as they start employing people to make it work at scale, that's when the whole thing starts to fall to pieces. And I think that's what's driven then the second part of what gets us, what motivates us and motivates me, and that is building an organisation that is healthy enough and is enduring enough over a long enough period of time to be able to deliver really high quality training at scale, and to do that for multiple generations of workers. So that's to me, it's not just solve the problem in terms of the 1 or 2 people who are attending this course right here, right now, today. It's solved this problem for whole workforces in whole industries over multiple generations.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that really gets us.
Cultural impact.
Yeah.
Within those industries to how they think about and approach the safety aspects of their job.
That's right. Yeah. And in some cases, in the offshore oil and gas industry, it's a very safety conscious industry anyway. and regardless of what views people might have about the oil and gas industry, in this area at least, we find them very good to work with. And in fact, it's the training is the bit that often lets them down. They have very high standards everywhere else, but they don't know how to get training to work. So that's where we fit in. That's our role in the entire system for the offshore oil and gas industry.
Great. Now, we share a passion for building long-term businesses, enduring organizations. And in some of our prep for today's conversation, I asked you a couple of questions, and I want to talk to you about your fascinating philosophy around building an enduring business. One of the comments that you made to me was, it isn't about me or any other individual, and it can't be if we want to build an enduring business of any scale. It's a different story if you're a really small SME.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'd love for you to just pull that apart a little bit and explain what you mean.
Yeah. So look, and I have to say, this is there's a lot. This is complex territory, right? And I think in what you and Adapt, the team at Adapt have done brilliantly is to take a really complex space and make it simple and accessible and usable for organisations like ours. There's some of this stuff that we're all together still trying to unpick and sort of understand. And, it can be very hard to explain this in simple terms to people, and I still struggle with it. So I'm going to do my best here, right?
Sure.
Gradually, I guess and this is, one of my things is I try to be quite scientific in my thinking, and I've got agricultural science background, and I'm a bit of a science geek. I like science, and I see the importance of thinking critically and looking at the evidence rather than just making assumptions or just going with the general flow. And I think that's the case in business. We hear the talk about what makes business work, and you see what gets delivered in business courses. And I did a few business units many years ago at uni. And what actually happens and what really happens are often really, they're different things, right? So, and the very best businesses, the businesses that truly contribute value over the longer term, tend to be the ones that are a bit quieter, just go about their business. They're not the ones out there making a lot of noise. That same sort of goes for their leaders, I suspect. But we don't see too many businesses that are enduring in their ability to contribute value to society over the longer term. If we look in Australia at most of the larger businesses in our society, there's been how many royal commissions over the last 10 or 15 years about a banking system, about aged care, about all of these, about gambling, all of these areas where some of our largest corporations operate. And it becomes clear when you look at how they operate sort of day to day. Yes, they contribute some value, but they also extract an awful lot of value.
Yeah.
So, and that's sort of the conversation I've, being part of the Adapt world, is that's a conversation that we often find ourselves having and saying, well, we don't want to be a part of that. There's a better way to do it. So to me, the enduring part of then taking an SME, scaling that SME up, and then setting it up for succession across multiple generations. The real challenges I see it, when you look at good businesses, what typically happens with an SME can be fantastic. You might even get a transition, like you and Bill have done, a very successful transition, sort of almost like a refoundership. But there'll come a point where if you scale to a certain level, then the capital value of the business becomes such that there is no way for a succession transition from one to another individual, or even a small number to another small number.
Yeah.
And so that means that at some point you've got to get away from the importance of that individual or a small group of individuals as the founders or whatever that role might be.
Yeah.
So, and that's where the difficulty of the term founder, I think, sort of comes in. It's super valuable for a period of time, for a generation to maybe even 2 generations. But at some point, my sense is that it starts to become a barrier to making progress. And what we're trying to do is to get an organisation ultimately that really organisation that takes responsibility for itself. It doesn't need mum and dad, right? It doesn't need, there's a group of contributors, a group of key stakeholders, and obviously clients are one stakeholder, but employees and shareholders or investors, whatever term you give them, they're the 2 main stakeholders of the organisation. And what we're trying to do is to work out, well, okay, how do you get the balance of those 2 working so that there's a mutuality between the 2, not a parent-child relationship like is traditionally the approach, but one where everybody's just being grown-ups.
Yeah. So then, as you, as a growing SME, get to the size where you then think it's wise to start reducing or diminishing the importance of the founder role or even the owner role or the key leader role, how do you tackle building the kind of leadership and the kind of culture beyond those key players so that the business can continue to do the right thing for the long term and survive and be around to do that?
Yeah. Cracking question. Look, I feel like partly by good intention and partly just by good luck, we've ended up, I feel like we're doing that. The real good luck bit of it came just in finding the right people over time. And we've grown some terrific leaders in our business. We've got, in our organisational leadership team, we've got a couple of sort of homegrown leaders who are just bloody brilliant. They've been part of the business for 15 plus years and they're still in their 40s. So, still a fair bit of their careers ahead of them. Absolutely committed to the organisation. They're sort of just as much the heart and soul of the organisation as I am or any of the owners who have been part of ERGT for many years. Their thinking, their imagination, their vision is as much of what ERGT, and when you talk about the facilities, my contribution to the quality of our facilities is generally to say yes when people ask me, can we do X, Y, Z? But it's those guys who are coming up who, and over the 10 or 15 years have come up with the design of the way this all works. So partly that's the good luck bit of it, which was just recognising good people, not necessarily recognising them in the moment, but recognising it was as much me learning about what good looked like as time went on. Along with that was recognising what good didn't look like. And we brought on a heap of different people at different times over the last 20 years to take leadership roles in the business who'd been very successful in a different environment, particularly a corporate environment. And sadly, all good people, all really hard workers, all super smart, all of them created barriers to our progress. And in fact, our most rapid progress has occurred when we found a way to exit the last of those people a few years ago. And at that time then, that enabled us by then we got clear on what do we need in leadership. And so we were able to go out and look for and find a handful of the right leaders who brought some of the skills from the corporate world that can add value to our business, but had an appreciation for what really made ERGT and other businesses like ours in the adapt world different from that corporate world they'd come from, because they recognised that it wasn't, that while there was some good stuff there, that it was problematic as well. So as a result, we've got a bit of a mix in our organisation now, and that combination of sort of newer talent but experienced in the outside world together with people who've perhaps been around a bit longer and really live and breathe ERGT is just working brilliantly.
So finding a way to bring the right players on the team sounds like quite a crucial thing for you guys to get right.
Yeah.
What?
Totally.
I want to spend a little bit of time there shortly, but what can the founders and the owners do to set those current and future key decision makers up for true success?
I think that, and without realising it, I think that learning zone, the Amy Edmondson, psychological safety, that trust. So, making sure building trust first before expecting accountability.
How do you do that in an organisation that's got nearly 250 people in it?
Look, I think we've done a reasonable job with those who are in leadership roles, much less well for the majority of the organisation, and we're working hard on that now. For our leaders, partly because people can only really find themselves in a leadership role in ERGT these days if they are naturally inclined towards building trust with their colleagues. Okay. Whether it's their team or their peers or those they may report to. So we've got people who are naturally inclined that way, but who are also very keen to see the business perform and to see individuals and teams perform. which then drives an understanding of accountability that's a bit different from that sort of traditional approach to accountability, which is more a carrot and stick sort of thing. And we've always avoided that carrot and stick thing. So I think we've always been a bit low on accountability in our organisation, but it's now that we're through ADAPT and with a lot of help from our coach, Susie, Progression, we've found, we now understand better how to create that psychological safety and now build accountability, and it's absolutely working.
Bit of a shameless plug for Susie, but she's just
totally
an
shameless.
Absolute powerhouse
She's
when
awesome.
it comes to strategy and SMEs and how to do that really, really well.
Yeah, she also doesn't take any bullshit. So,
that's almost certainly her greatest quality. She'll tell you how it is.
She totally does, yeah.
So then, creating genuine trust and psychological safety on a large scale is critically important.
Yeah.
You mentioned before that you had to go through the experience of exiting people that were non-aligned.
Yeah.
And a good way to not have to end up in that position is to become excellent at bringing really well-aligned people in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess first, tell me what you learned from those exit moments, and also how do you tackle today bringing the right people in?
So the first thing I learned from the exits, and the reason we needed to exit those people is because we hired them in the first place, right? Should never have hired them in the first place. So why did we hire them in the first place? Lack of understanding. Partly a lack of understanding and partly a lack of, to some degree, confidence. So certainly if we go back 15 years, the only thing I was confident in was that I was not the right person to lead ERGT. And at that stage, we were a lot smaller than we are now, but we were growing at the time. And I wasn't particularly interested in the business side of the business. I was at the stage that, that you and others are, young kids and all of those sort of challenges of, outside work and all of that sort of, I found that was just, I struggled with that, right? And so I thought, geez, the way to save the day here is I'll go and find somebody else who can do this instead. And it's really easy to find people who reckon they can do something like this, okay? Piece of cheese. The challenge is finding people, because generally what I've discovered is that the more confident people are in their own capability, there's often a bit of an inverse relationship, right?
Interesting.
And particularly what I discovered was that I'd found people who'd been really successful in the corporate world, and so therefore were very confident in themselves. Now, what that meant was they came with a high level of confidence, but they knew how to survive in the corporate world, which was really the opposite of what we're trying to do.
Absolutely.
And what they universally came in and did, and these, I say this with a degree of respect because I like all of these people there and are hard workers and they really did the best they could do. But they came in and sort of thought, geez, I really like the look of this ERGT. You guys are doing some pretty cool stuff. I'd love to be a part of this. I can help. I'm going to help by turning you into exactly the opposit of what I like.
What makes you special today, yes.
That's exactly right. Without realising that was what they were doing. But that, of course, was all they knew. And it took me a long time because they're so confident. And I sort of have a pretty high level of self-doubt. And a bit of doubt, I think, is a very, very healthy thing.
Yep.
At the time, I had too much doubt. But I would question myself rather than question them. And it took a long time to get to the point where I realised, no, this isn't me, this is you.
Yeah.
And then it took a lot longer again to then do something about it.
Okay.
So what I've learned is, it is not easy to find the right people. We have been very lucky to find in particular, the sort of the small handful of people who've joined us in the last couple of years who are contributing so much value now. We've been lucky, but we've created our own luck. So we've gone out to the market in a really authentic sort of way to say, hey, look, this is what we're after. Are you interested? And we've got lucky.
Great. So sounds like there was a lesson there in understanding the very, very distinct difference between corporate organizations and SMEs and how they run operationally, strategically, all that sort of stuff, and identifying good operators that can actually excel in the SME environment. And then maybe moving quicker when you think that there is a mismatch or a misalignment,
Yep, totally.
or not a full delivery on the accountabilities of the role they hold.
Yeah. I think the bit, if people are willing to look at things through a different lens, then it's absolutely worth working with people. But there are some people who have just become, and typically they're people more of my sort of, age group. People who've spent so long in that system, the way schooling was done sort of 30, 40, 50 years ago, then the way the corporate world's operated, the way bureaucracy and governments have operated. If someone's been immersed in that for sort of 30 or 40 years of their working life, it's bloody hard to change. So, but there are those who recognise the weaknesses of it too. But I do, just coming back to that point you made, I just want to, there was a real penny drop for me probably about 6 or 7 years ago, and it was in a conversation I was having with Bill Withers. And he put me onto the book by Frederick Laloux, Reinventing Organisations, and that really simple sort of mindset way of understanding, of recognising there are multiple different types of organisations that have evolved over time. And if you look at the difference between an orange organisation, which is, and this is just the symbolism that Laloux used, that is typical of our sort of corporate colleagues, profit-driven, meritocracy, short-termism, so a whole bunch of things which sort of work, right? They work together as a system. But if you're able to transcend that to become a green or even potentially a teal organisation, it's a different approach. And I'm not going to get into the detail of that now because even I struggle with sort of trying to wrap my head around that. But it was the recognition that they are fundamentally different things. Green isn't a different version of orange. You can have a green tinged version of orange, I think. And I think that's what a lot of corporates do with ESG and that sort of thing. Yep. They make believe that they're about being different, but the reality is they're still driven by the same, ultimately, profit and shareholder primacy. Whereas in a green organisation, it's a recognition you can meet the needs of multiple stakeholders and do it way, way more successfully, but you've got to have all of the parts working together as a single whole.
Yep.
It's the people who can see that and get that that's a real thing can absolutely succeed. So that's what I'm looking for when I look for a potential new leader. It's somebody who is able to see that, as distinct from the people who just can't see that there is a different way from doing it from that traditional orange approach.
So let's talk about those parts then that you referred to be able to build a green organisation. Mm-hmm. We addressed trust and psychological safety. You have to have a space like that in order for any level of growth and innovation. You need the right people on the bus,
totally,
as Jim Collins would say.
Yep, absolutely.
And you need to create some level of leadership beyond yourself so that it can be handed over and there's space then for those people to lead. But what are some of the other parts that a business needs, especially a business of your size, in order to become truly enduring and generational? So look, I reckon I'm a huge believer in the importance of strategy. So the people piece of it is that, so there's, what's that, Peter Drucker saying, strategy eats, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Now, technically what he's really saying is, really you need to have both, right? And even Drucker wasn't arguing that you've got to have both. Yeah. But there's no point having good strategy if you don't have the culture to support it and to implement it, right? Absolutely. So if you've got good culture, that will beget good strategy because great culture gets the right thinking. But you've got to do that thinking. And that for me has been, the one thing I think that we've done reasonably successfully over 15 years is to think strategically, probably more than that really. We started thinking strategically as early as 1997 when we decided to get out of while we were mainly a training business, we used to sell height safety equipment and install height safety systems on roofs and things like that. We enjoyed doing that. We made money out of it, but it was distracting from doing what we really felt was most important. And so we decided to ditch it. And so since then, we've only been a training organisation. And that makes us really unusual. We're the only, can't think of a single possible competitor that only delivers training. They all hire out staff or sell equipment or hire out equipment or both. So that was strategic thinking. And that was the first example of it that I can think of from back in 97. And in order to think strategically, you've got to understand what's going on. And
good strategy is the insight, and the understanding is the insight through the complexity that we all operate in. If you can see through that complexity to the simple insight on the far side of it and devise a strategy around that insight, that's what really then enables success. So we've been fortunate that we've had a culture that's enabled us to implement strategy as we've gone along quite successfully. That's why we've ended up a monopoly. But without the strategy, we'd have continued to do the same thing as most of our competitors, I think, and we wouldn't have had the clarity that would have seen us in the position that we're in right now.
Okay.
And what the strategy work and strategy I don't think needs to be complicated. We have applied the Patrick Lencioni sort of approach to strategy for quite a few years, and the ADAPT method, which uses OKRs, is a more sophisticated version of that sort of simple approach that Lencioni had, but it really is exactly the same. It's a nice, simple approach that works on insight and deep understanding. And through that, we've been able to be really clear about what we're about, how we do things, and what we do have to focus on and what we don't have to focus on.
So today you are on the organizational leadership team at ERGT, which means you're a strategic leader in that business.
Yeah.
And in order for that business to be truly enduring, that means that at some point you're not going to be anymore.
Correct.
I'm not talking timelines yet, but I'm talking mindset.
It's closer. It's getting closer, right?
Well, what I'm interested in is the mindset of the organizational leader who currently also has the role of strategic leader.
Yeah.
But one of your biggest jobs is to be able to build the future of strategic leadership when you're not there anymore.
Yeah, totally.
And strategy is such an important piece of that. And I know I consider ERGT and your team world class in terms of your execution of good strategy for an SME.
Yeah. It's very generous.
Where my data pool is pretty small. If you look at the 400 million SMEs around the world, but I'm not shy of sharing an opinion here and there.
Go for it. Yeah, welcome to that opinion.
Yeah. So what's the mindset that you apply, or what are some of the thinking that you undergo in order to do this well?
Yeah, good question. So, look, I think... So I'll start off with the challenge. I'm probably, for whatever reason, I'm really interested in strategy, and I think I have some ability in strategy. So so that's probably been my main role, over time, is to sort of drive strategy. But you can't have a team that's, if you've got that little sort of long-term horizons, like I try to think in 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 years sort of timeframes, even longer these days. And that requires a different type of thinking to, how do we solve the problems that we're facing today? What's causing us grief right now? What's the opportunity right now? So we've obviously got, we've got people in our team who are fantastic at working out the sort of the shorter term, the sort of the weeks to months to, 1 or 2 years. And then we've got others who are better at the sort of longer term. But what we're trying to do gradually, and with Susie's help, is to sort of build a team approach to how we think about strategy. And so what we've done for the last couple of years is it's been, as we've articulated strategy clearly, and ADAPT forced us to do that. In order to document it and get it into the ADAPT platform, we had to document clearly what we probably hadn't really documented clearly before. A lot of it was in my head, and a lot of it I'd just talk with people in sort of vague generalities and sort of assume everyone understood. But we've got much more specific now. And in doing that and engaging the leadership team and also our next tier of leaders in that conversation a bit more, people's understanding of it has improved dramatically out of sight, which helps them make better decisions. And then as they see those decisions work, they're saying, this strategy actually works. So gradually we're building the sort of strategic thinking capability of a whole bunch of people in the business. And we're with the support of ADAPT, and building an approach to thinking about strategy that can then carry forward without me having to be there for every bit of that in the future. Having said that, we also have, and so that's in the organisation, we also have what we call our custodians, and which used to be our board of directors. It's still our directors. They still hold those responsibilities. But we've changed it from being a board of directors to custodians because they're the custodians of the overall system that the organisation employs to ensure its success, its enduring success over multiple generations.
Okay, so that direction that's been given by the vision of the organisation.
Correct, yeah.
Right.
So the custodians do and will continue to play a role in strategy in the future. Very much more at a higher level. It's the organisation's role to devise strategy in the sort of 3 to 5 year context, but in the longer term, the custodians also play a part in that as well.
So you've built real leadership infrastructure with the clarity between the role differentiation of those who think about where do we want to end up ultimately, long-term vision, and then those who are responsible right now for formulating the plan of execution to get us.
That's right.
Over
Absolutely.
there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And so then you guys have been really leaning into good strategy for a number of years now. And I'm interested to explore if you've got an example of maybe one of your greatest or biggest wins as a result of being so disciplined with strategy.
Well, I guess there's probably the biggest win and the ultimate win, right? So for many years we operated in a pretty competitive environment. So if we go back to say 2000, I'll just pluck out a number, 2011, right? And so it was just the first year that we were into the ESO contract in Victoria. So we'd just gone from being a single operation based at Jandakot Airport in Perth, Western Australia, and having sort of probably 40, maybe 45 staff in total. We'd just taken on 30 more staff from a competitor where we'd taken over this contract at Sale and sort of Gippsland in Victoria. And at the time, the main reason we did that, because we knew it was going to hurt, and it really did. Like, it took us 7 or 8 years to get to the point where it was, where we felt like it just wasn't brutally hard work in that contract. And in the last 2 years, it's fantastic. It works really, really well for us. But the main reason we did it at the time, because we had competitors lined up to take on that contract. And if they'd done so, that would have given an international competitor, I think, a foothold in Australia, which would have made it very, very hard for us to ever be enduringly successful. Because the market we're in, we're dealing with large corporates, so 5 or 6 oil and gas companies who are brutal in their procurement approaches. And I know a lot of other ADAPT clients in the resources sector here in WA feel exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
So we knew we needed to have a bit of power in the game to be able to stand our ground. Because every time we tried to stand our ground, they just go, we're just going to go to somebody else then. And we knew they would have done, right? Just because that was the power they had. So, and our business is about repeat business. So we need those clients coming back to us year after year after year after year to make it work. It's not good enough to get someone's work for 12 months. That just doesn't cut the mustard.
Yeah.
So we eventually realised probably about 2014, 2015, actually, there was an oil and gas industry downturn. The market size shrunk dramatically, and we suddenly realised how big the market was going to be for the future, for the long term. And we thought, geez, there's no way that this is going to work with 2 providers, let alone 4 or 5. So we need to position ourselves so that we become the only provider of choice for the industry. And if any of our competitors choose to exit, then we need to be there to pick up the pieces. So we ended up buying a training centre in Victoria, and this was actually in 2014. We picked up our competitor's training centre in Victoria. 2016, competitor's training centre in Darwin, and both of these for a fraction of what it would have cost us to build the same centre, because they just weren't viable the way they were built. And then eventually our last competitor exited in 2020. And we'd been seeing that coming for a while, and we'd actually been talking with them to try to find ways to sort of make that work for them, work for us, and work for industry. And we managed to make all of that happen. And of course, COVID sort of accelerated this a bit, but it was inevitably going to happen anyway. Now, we did that. This was all driven out of the 4 anchors that we have in our strategic anchors model. So the first is a network of training centres in the right locations. So we always knew we needed a centre in Melbourne and a centre in Darwin, as well as our one in Perth, because that's where the offshore oil and gas industry operates.
Yeah.
And so long as we had a helicopter underwater escape training facility and a fire training ground at each of those centres, well, then the industry would have to come to us in those locations. And if we could serve the whole industry nationally like that, well, that would help to support industry trust, which is our second anchor. So industry trust is a really important anchor. Means we have a relationship with the oil and gas industry, not just with individual clients. And we knew to achieve that, we had to have contracts with all of the big operators. So Chevron, Shell, Woodside, ExxonMobil, Inpex, etc., Santos. So we pursued that. At the same time, we then pursued a more standardised approach to training, so that instead of each of our clients having a different approach, they did roughly the same, and then they'd come back consistently for retraining, whether it be on a 2, 3 or 4 yearly cycle. And if they're committed to that and they see the benefit of that, well, then the repeat work just keeps on coming, right? And then the final bit to make all of that work is you need to have a fantastic team of trainers that is stable, works to a really high standard, and is able to flex up and down as the industry needs change. So we've really focused on all of those 4 things for quite a few years. Haven't done them all brilliantly, especially the training bit of it. I don't think we've quite got that right, and we're working with our training team right now to improve that. But by focusing on those 4 things, put us in that position where we could pick up each of those other training centres and then ultimately see our last remaining competitor exit, and these guys were a not-for-profit, do that in a dignified way for them, so that was successful for them. And we actually managed to build industry trust through that process.
Wow.
So as we became a monopoly, the industry thanked us because we really helped the industry out, because these other guys were going to go out of business and leave a major industry asset.
Yeah.
So that's the big story, right? So as a result of that strategy, we now find ourselves financially sustainable for the first time ever, and we have been since 2020. Now, market conditions are good, so we know there'll be a downturn sometime. That will be the true test of are we successful?
Yep.
But I don't know of another training organisation, certainly not in our space in the country, that is financially successful and has satisfied clients. Just they might occur for a few years at a time.
Yeah.
So we're not just standing, we're thriving.
Great.
And it's that strategy that's enabled it.
And has there been opportunity to be distracted or deviate from those anchors or those focuses along the way?
Totally, heaps along the way. These days, I'd say we are really good these days at sticking to it.
Good.
Far out have we been challenged heaps of times in the past. And especially, Gabe, it's really like when the market's tight, when we're struggling financially as a business, that's when we want to just jump on anything that will we think might help.
Absolutely.
But I reckon we've got a lot better discipline now. So we stick to our knitting. Yeah.
Yeah, so powerful. Any massive epic fails along the way that you had to learn from that might be a good bit of wisdom or lesson for anybody listening?
Look, the people one for sure. I'd say that's probably the biggest one. The other epic fail. And it's not, in the end, it was an epic win, really. For many years, we had planned and I just had always assumed this is just what you do. We had planned to prepare the business for sale. So, and in fact, the group of shareholders, we got a couple of investors who had an involvement in the business, already. We raised some capital in 2011 to build the training centre we've got in Perth now, which, as you've said, is it's a pretty impressive setup. And we did that pretty cost effectively. So we didn't have to raise a lot of capital, but it was enough to bring a group of shareholders together. And together we agreed, right, we're going to build this business over the next 5 or 6 or 7 years and then sell it, and we'll all sail off into the sunset, and, we'll be wildly wealthy, and, we'll have done fantastically, right? And I believed all that crap. And we worked towards that over a few years. And we eventually, but the only thing we all agreed to, and the chair of our board and I were both really quite adamant about this, was that it had to go to a good home. And we eventually found what we thought might be a good home in our only significant global competitor, a Danish-based company. And so we got to the point of doing due diligence with them in late 2015. And all through that process, I was thinking, firstly, we need to get out because I'm just struggling with this in the leadership role, and I can't take the business forward. And these guys will be a much better home. And hey, we'll make great money out of this. And then, of course, the reality sets in. And over a period of, having spent time with these guys in Denmark, good business, right? But gradually it dawned on us that, and a global business in 30 countries, gradually dawned on us that the reason that we found them so good is that it wasn't their organisational culture, it was Scandinavian culture. So being good Scandinavians, good Danes, they're just honest, methodical, reasonably open and transparent. But that wasn't true for their whole organisation. In each of the countries they operated in, including Australia, they just took on the culture of whatever they got, right?
Interesting.
And there was a local firm that they'd bought that we knew quite well that actually introduced us to them. And their culture was really different, right? Not what we were after, right? So gradually it dawned on us that actually, so they're not going to help us with our culture here in Australia. In fact, there's a risk that we're going to get subsumed into this other Australian entity they had, and the culture is going to go downhill. Mm-hmm. The other thing is we realised they weren't that good at running a training business. So that wasn't their main business. It was just a part of their business. So anyway, eventually, long story short, eventually the whole thing fell over. And I probably should point out, one of the things I really liked about them was that while they're a privately owned organisation, for-profit organisation, they had a very long-term view. And their ownership structure was 90% was two Danish foundations, one owned by the Lego the family behind Lego, and the other behind one of the
little-known business over,
and the other behind one of those two or three big Danish pharmaceutical companies. So they are foundations. And the CEO of this company that was looking to acquire us, he together with the CEO of the family, of the foundation of the Lego family, they'd sort of come up with this ownership structure for this business, right? With the idea that they'd make it a very long-term play, and they wanted to do good. So their business was about saving lives. They ran ambulance services and fire and rescue services, as well as doing the training piece. And around the time that we concluded due diligence, and the reason we called an end to it was because the oil and gas market had tanked. And so our funds had dried up, theirs had dried up, and really the numbers just didn't stack up anymore. Within 6 months, there'd been a change in control of the Lego Family Foundation, which led to a change of control of the board of this particular firm that was looking to acquire us, which led to the CEO being exited and replaced with someone who's really not at all what I'd be interested in, who I'd be interested in working with.
Consider a good home, yeah.
So no longer a good home. They then sold off the training business to a private equity firm. So if we'd done the deal, ERGT would be in exactly the opposite situation to what we were trying to create.
Yeah.
And I would have been stuck because the deal required that I remain, and this is common, right? For most SME owners, as you exit, you're required to remain a part of the operation for at least a few years. And in my case, that was going to be 5 years. And I thought, well, if I'm going to have to stick around for another 5 years, why don't we just do it ourselves?
Yeah.
So I learned a lot there about the seductive idea that you can build an SME, sell it, and it's going to go on to bigger and greater things. Yes, sometimes that will happen. But the majority, in my experience, it's not that simple. And the majority of the time, it's the exact opposite, because if you sell to a corporate, and that's most likely who you're going to sell to, they are who they are, and the world they operate in is the way that world operates. So you cannot. It might be good for a little while, but it's not necessary. You can't be confident it's going to stay that way.
Yeah, and can you put your head down on a pillow at the end of the day, saying that that's what you ultimately truly want?
Totally, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
And so as a result, that gave me a lot more confidence in my leadership, and a lot more confidence in us as an organisation. And we've just gone, since then we've had some pretty tough times, but we've been much more resolute and much clearer about what the future looks like for us.
Amazing. And so we've got to wrap it up, because I could keep you here for hours to chat about this stuff. In the spirit of sharing to those who are early on their journey of building an enduring, resilient, long-term business, what's one thing or one piece of advice that you'd be comfortable to share that you think would actually make a difference?
No, this is probably my own personal thing. Life wasn't meant to be easy, and I know every SME owner sort of knows that, right? But it just is what it is. And you can be as well-intended and as hardworking, et cetera, as you like, but the world is what the world is. And so you have to meet the world on its terms, but you can then operate the way you need to operate, so long as you are completely realistic about that. Yeah. No wishful thinking, no warm, fuzzy, And this is the real challenge. I'm not sure if integrity is the right word, but this is I think what we're doing now that I wouldn't have felt confident we could do 10 or 15 years ago is to really be true to who we are, but to meet the world on its own terms. So we don't try to make believe that the world is this wonderful place that is going to reward us because we're trying to do the right thing. The world doesn't give a stuff. You've got
to go and make your own luck.
You got to make your own luck, and you are absolutely responsible for whatever outcomes arise, and okay, if everyone gets good luck, everyone gets bad luck. But you make your own luck as much as possible. Yeah,
amazing. Shane, very grateful for your time and your generous sharing of the story of ERGT. But we consider you guys a massive inspiration for the work you do with your team and with your organisation and in the industry. And thank you for sharing some of that with us and with the listeners, and continue to watch in awe and amazement of the great work you do out there. So, yeah, thank you.
You're very generous, Gabe. Thank you. Look, I really enjoyed it, and I think you managed to keep me on the straight and narrow reasonably. I went off piste a couple of times.
I think we did all right. Yeah. It was, just over an hour. That's not too bad because we could be here for hours.
Yeah, totally. Thanks very much. Cheers, Gabe.